What if I told you that 150 years ago, a man pulled off the greatest identity heist in history? Not digital, physical. Not brief decades. Not forgettable, it split an empire and inspired revolutions across the globe. Before we dive into this psychological thriller that makes Netflix crime docs look tame, I need you to do something. Hit that like button, because you're about to witness a story so twisted, so gothic, that it'll haunt your dreams. Subscribe if you want more tales from history's darkest corners. And drop a comment. If someone showed up tomorrow claiming to be your dead brother, your lost child, your missing lover, would you believe them? Or would you tear them apart to find the truth? Because that's exactly what Victorian England did to me. And the scars, they're still bleeding. My name is Arthur Orton, or maybe it's Roger Tichborne. After 150 years, even I'm not sure anymore. But what I am sure of is this. I am about to take you on a journey through madness, empire, and the price of being whoever the world needs you to be. Welcome to my confession. Welcome to my curse. Close your eyes. Smell that? Copper and rot, sawdust soaked in blood. That's Wapping, 1834. That's where Arthur Orton, where I first drew breath in my father's butcher shop. The Thames stank of sewage and dreams. Rats scurried between cobblestones slick with entrails. My father's hands were always stained red. From the pigs, he said. But I knew better. In Wapping, everything bleeds. I was the son of a London butcher who went to sea as a boy, spent time in Chile, and worked as a butcher in Australia. But here's what the history books won't tell you. I was running. Always running. From the ghosts of every animal I'd slaughtered. From the stench of poverty that clung to my clothes like a shroud. Picture this. 1849. I'm 15. Standing on the docks as HMS Ocean prepares to sail. The ship groans like a dying beast. I climb aboard, not for adventure, but because staying meant becoming my father. And my father was already dead inside. But let me paint you a picture of my father, George Orton. He wasn't just any butcher. He was a purveyor of ship stores, and his business became quite prosperous. Picture him. Thick arms stained red to the elbows, hands like hammers, eyes that had seen too much death to flinch at anything. Every morning, before dawn, he'd drag himself to the shop at 69 Wapping High Street. The building leaned against its neighbors like a drunk against a lamppost. 3 floors of misery. The shop below, where carcasses hung like executed prisoners. Living quarters above, where 12 boys fought for scraps of attention. And the attic, where my mother hid her tears. George Orton was a businessman, I'll give him that. Ships from around the world docked at Wapping. Merchantmen bound for India. Whalers heading to the Arctic. Navy vessels carrying England's glory to foreign shores. And every one of them needed meat. I learned to walk among hanging sides of beef. I learned to talk over the buzz of flies. I learned that everything in this world bleeds. And if you're not holding the knife, you're on the chopping block. My earliest memory? I'm 3 years old, maybe 4. My father hoists me up to watch him slaughter a pig. The animal's eyes. God, those eyes. They look right at me as the blade goes in. Wide with terror, then clouding with death. That's life, boy. My father grunts, blood spattering his apron. Something dies so something else can live. I didn't understand then that he was talking about me. I was considered slightly slow and was a sufferer of St. Vitus' dance. a kind of convulsion that can affect adolescents and now known to be connected to rheumatic fever. Picture it. A twitching, stuttering boy in a family of giants, trying to find his place in a world that had already forgotten him. The convulsions came without warning. I'd be helping in the shop, carrying a joint of mutton, when suddenly my hands would shake like leaves in a hurricane. Customers would stare. My brothers would laugh. My father would curse. Useless, he'd mutter. Can't even hold a blade steady. But you know what I learned from those convulsions? I learned to hide. I learned to watch. I learned that the world sees weakness as invitation, and strength as the only currency that matters. And slowly, very slowly, I learned to lie. I left school early and was employed in my father's shop. Education was a luxury the Ortons couldn't afford, or rather, couldn't be bothered with. Why waste money on books when there were animals to kill and money to make? But here's the thing about working in a ship's provisioning store. You meet the world. Every day, sailors would swagger into our shop with stories dripping from their tongues like honey. Tales of Caribbean islands where the sand was white as bone. South American ports where gold flowed like wine. Australian colonies where a man could reinvent himself as easily as changing clothes. I learned to listen. God, how I learned to listen. While my brothers competed to see who could lift the heaviest carcass or wield the sharpest blade, I lurked in corners, soaking up stories like a sponge soaks blood. There was Captain Morrison, a Scotsman who'd sailed around the Cape of Good Hope 6 times. He taught me that a man's accent was like a passport. Change your voice, change your world. I'd practice his burr in the cellar, rolling my R's until my tongue bled. There was Senor Valdez, a Chilean merchant who bought our salt pork for his journey home. He'd gesture with hands like birds, painting pictures of the Andes Mountains, of valleys green as emeralds, of towns where nobody asked your name or cared about your past. I learned Spanish curses from him and something more precious. The knowledge that across the ocean, Arthur Orton could become anybody. Amigo, he'd say. In Valparaiso, a man writes his own story. No fathers, no brothers, no yesterday, only tomorrow. He had no idea he was planting seeds in a mind already poisoned by ambition. Then there were the gentlemen. Oh, the gentlemen. They'd occasionally venture into our humble establishment when their usual suppliers couldn't meet their demands. Picture them. Silk top hats, ivory-handled walking sticks, voices like cut crystal. I'd watch them inspect our goods with the casual arrogance of gods examining insects. The way they moved, confident, entitled, as if the world existed solely for their pleasure. The way they spoke, every word considered, every syllable a declaration of superiority. One I remember particularly well. Lord something or other, I never caught his full name. He had these pale blue eyes and a way of looking through people as if they were glass. When he spoke to my father, it wasn't conversation, it was audience. A king addressing a subject. That night, I stood before our cracked mirror and practiced his posture. Shoulders back, chin lifted, eyes that saw everything and revealed nothing. Good afternoon, I'd whisper in his clipped tones. I trust the arrangements are satisfactory. My brothers caught me once. They laughed until their sides hurt. Little Arthur playing dress-up. Think you're a toff now, do you? But I wasn't playing. I was rehearsing. By age 14, I was my father's best killer. Not his strongest son, that would be Thomas. Not his smartest, that was probably William. But his most efficient. I could bleed a carcass clean in half the time it took my brothers, and with half the mess. You see, they killed with anger. I killed with art. There's a moment, and every butcher knows this, when the animal realizes what's about to happen. The cow's eyes widen. The pig stops struggling. The sheep makes one last, heartbroken bleat. In that moment you see their soul. My brothers looked away, found excuses to busy themselves elsewhere. But I stared into those dying eyes and learned the most important lesson of my life. Everyone dies alone. Everyone faces that final moment with nothing but themselves. And I thought, if we all end the same way, what difference do the details make? Rich or poor, noble or common, we all bleed red. We all become meat. So why not choose which meat to become? I started reading in secret. I acquired basic literacy. More than basic, actually. I devoured every newspaper, every book, every scrap of written word that crossed my path. While my brothers spent their evenings drinking at the prospect of Whitby pub, I was teaching myself to be someone else. I read about the nobility, their histories, their customs, their way of speaking and thinking. I learned about primogeniture, how the eldest son inherits everything while younger sons scramble for scraps. Sound familiar? I read about the British Empire, stretching across the globe like a vast spider web. I read about Australia, that distant continent where convicts became colonists, where yesterday's nobody could become tomorrow's somebody. And slowly, very slowly, I began to understand something that would change everything. Identity isn't born, it's performed. And if it's performed, it can be stolen. The question was, whose identity was worth stealing? That's when I heard about the ship's passenger manifests. Rich young men sailing to exotic locations, seeking adventure before settling into their inherited responsibilities. Sons of baronets taking grand tours. Heirs to ancient fortunes seeing the world before claiming their birthright. And I thought, what if one of them never came back? What if fate intervened? What if a storm, a disease, an accident removed them from the story? Who would know? Who would remember? And who would dare question a gentleman's word if he returned? Changed? That night, I made a decision that would echo through eternity. I was going to see, not as Arthur Orton, 12th son of a whopping butcher, but as a man preparing to become someone else entirely. In 1849, at the age of 15, I was apprenticed to Captain Brooks of the ship Ocean. The ship sailed to South America, and in June 1849, I deserted at Valparaiso. Just like that, one day I was Arthur Orton, butcher's apprentice from Wapping. The next, I was a ghost walking the streets of a Chilean port city. But let me tell you about that journey first. 3 months at sea on a merchant vessel, and every day was a masterclass in reinvention. The ocean. 200 feet of rotting timber, canvas, and human misery. 40 crew members crammed into a space meant for 20. The air below deck thick enough to cut with a knife. Sweat, vomit, tar, and desperation all mixing into a cocktail that would make Satan himself gag. But for me, it was paradise. Because at sea, nobody cares who your father is. Nobody knows your brothers. Nobody remembers your convulsions or your stammering or the way you smell of blood and poverty. At sea, you're whoever you say you are. I listened to the other sailors tell their stories around the night watch. Thompson claimed he'd been a soldier in India. Robert swore he was the son of a Welsh minister. Martinez insisted he was descended from Spanish royalty. Half of them were lying, maybe all of them, but nobody cared because the lies were more interesting than the truth. I learned to splice rope from a man who might have been a Cambridge graduate. I learned navigation from someone who claimed to be a disgraced naval officer. I learned to fight with a knife from a fellow who swore he'd killed 17 men in tavern brawls. Were any of these stories true? Who knows? Who cares? The ocean swallowed our pasts and gave us new ones in return. Valparaiso, the Valley of Paradise. If you've never seen it, imagine a city built on the edge of the world. Houses clinging to impossible hills, the Pacific stretching to infinity, air so clear it cuts your lungs like crystal. When I walked off that ship, I left Arthur Orton behind like a molting snake leaves its skin. I had a few coins in my pocket, a basic knowledge of Spanish, and something more valuable than either, the absolute certainty that I would never go back to being who I was. But here's the funny thing about running away: you can't run from yourself. Not yet, anyway. That requires more advanced techniques. I made my way up country to Melipilla, where I stayed for a year and 7 months and befriended the Castro family. I learned some Spanish and facility as a cattleman. The Castros, God bless their kind hearts. They found me half dead by the roadside. Fever, dehydration. Speaking a mixture of English, broken Spanish, and pure desperation. They could have left me for the vultures. Instead, they carried me home. Senora Castro was a woman built like a cathedral, all curves and comfort and unshakable faith. She nursed me back to health with soup that tasted like heaven and stories that sounded like prayers. Her husband, Don Miguel, was a cattleman with hands like leather and a laugh that could shake mountains. And their son, Carlos Castro, my age, my height, similar build. We became brothers in all but blood. For 18 months, I was Arturo to them. Not Arthur Arturo, the Spanish version of my name, soft around the edges, exotic on the tongue. I learned to ride horses bareback across the Chilean pampas. I learned to rope cattle and brand steers and speak Spanish like a native. More importantly, I learned to be loved. You have to understand, growing up as the 12th son in a family where attention was rationed like bread during famine, I had never been anyone's favorite, never been chosen first, praised loudest, or remembered best. But to the Castros, I was their adopted son, their miracle, the foreign boy who'd fallen from heaven into their lives. Senora Castro would stroke my hair and call me Mi Niño Precioso, my precious child. Don Miguel taught me to play guitar and sing Mexican ballads under the stars. Carlos shared his dreams of seeing London, of visiting the great city his new brother described in such vivid detail. For the first time in my life, I tasted what it meant to be wanted. And then I destroyed it. I returned to Wapping in 1851 and entered my father's business, becoming an expert slaughterman. But I didn't return empty-handed. I brought gifts from my Chilean family: hand-woven ponchos, silver jewelry, bottles of wine that had aged in Andean caves. More importantly, I brought a new name: Thomas Castro. Arthur Orton walks back into 69, Wapping High Street after 2 years abroad, and his own family barely recognizes him. I was taller, broader, tanned by foreign sun and strengthened by foreign work. My English carried traces of Spanish melody. My posture held echoes of horseback riding and open horizons. My brothers stared like I was a ghost. My mother wept. My father looked at me with something I'd never seen before. Respect. Well, he grunted, examining my weathered hands and steady gaze. Seems the sea made a man of you. For 6 months I was the prodigal son returned. I regaled them with tales of Chilean adventures, demonstrated my ropework skills, taught my younger brothers Spanish phrases that made the local girls swoon. But slowly, inevitably, the old patterns reasserted themselves. The 12th son of 12. The convulsions returned, not as severe but still there, still marking me as different, still marking me as less. And I began to plan my escape. Here's what I learned during those 6 months back in Wapping. You can't go home again, but you can't fully leave until you become someone else entirely. Arthur Orton was still trapped in his father's shop, still smelling of blood and broken dreams. But Thomas Castro was free. Thomas Castro had stories to tell and places to go. Thomas Castro had learned to reinvent himself once, which meant he could do it again. In November 1852, I sailed for Tasmania aboard the Middleton and arrived at Hobart in May 1853. This time, I wasn't running from something, I was running toward something. The question was, what? The Middleton was a convict transport, which tells you something about the class of passenger I could afford to be. But I wasn't a convict. I was a free settler, carrying papers that identified me as Thomas Castro, cattleman, late of Chile and England. During the 4-month voyage, I perfected my new identity. I practiced Carlos Castro's mannerisms until they became second nature. I adopted his way of gesturing with his hands, his habit of tilting his head when he listened, even his particular laugh. By the time we reached Van Diemen's Land, Arthur Orton existed only in my memory. And even there, he was fading. Thomas Castro, on the other hand, was becoming more real every day. Hobart Town, 1853. Imagine a frontier settlement clinging to the edge of civilization. Convict barracks, free settlers, Aboriginal people whose land this had been for thousands of years, all thrown together in a bubbling cauldron of ambition, desperation, and possibility. I found work as a slaughterman because no matter how far you run, some skills follow you like shadows. But I also found something else: opportunity. Australia was full of men reinventing themselves, ex-convicts becoming businessmen, failed gentlemen becoming successful colonists. Nobody asked too many questions about your past because everyone was trying to escape theirs. I worked hard, saved money, and listened. God, how I listened. To stories of gold rushes and cattle stations, of missing persons and unclaimed inheritances, of families back in England mourning sons who'd vanished into the colonial wilderness. And slowly, very slowly, I began to understand something that would change everything. The perfect crime wasn't about stealing money or property. It was about stealing a life, someone else's life, someone who wouldn't be needing it anymore. By 1866, Thomas Castro owned a butcher shop in Wagga Wagga, New South Wales. I was prosperous, respected, even popular. The local constable played cards with me on Thursday nights. The Anglican minister's wife bought her Sunday roast from my shop. Children called me Uncle Tommy. I had achieved what Arthur Orton had only dreamed of: respectability. But you know what they say about careful what you wish for? Respectability is a prison with gilded bars. Every day the same routine. Every customer the same conversations. Every evening the same empty cottage and the same empty future stretching ahead like a dusty road to nowhere. But here's where it gets interesting. While I was learning to kill on foreign seas, another young man, Roger Tichborne, was living the life I should have had. Born with silver in his mouth while I had blood under my fingernails. Now, let me paint you a picture of privilege. Roger Charles Doughty Tichborne, heir to ancient estates, educated at Stonyhurst, lover of poetry and fine wine. Everything I wasn't. April 20th, 1854. The Bella sails from Rio de Janeiro. Roger aboard, returning from his grand tour of South America. The Atlantic spreads before them like black velvet, beautiful and hungry. What happens next depends on who you ask. The official story? Storm. Wreckage. All souls lost. But I'll tell you what really happened, because I was there. Not on the Bella, but in the spirit realm where all lost souls gather. The ship didn't just sink, it was swallowed. The ocean opened like a mouth, and Roger Tichborne fell into its gullet, screaming my name. Why my name? Because destiny has a sense of humor, my friends. While Roger drowned in Atlantic waters, I was learning to become him in Chilean gutters. Learning his accent from British sailors. Learning his stories from drunken soldiers. Learning to be anyone except Arthur Orton, the butcher's boy who smelled like death. But here's where our tale turns from tragedy to horror. Lady Henriette Felicite Tichborne, Roger's mother. French aristocrat, devout Catholic, and after 1854, completely, beautifully, dangerously insane. Picture her. Black dress, pale skin, eyes like broken mirrors. Every night for 11 years, she lights candles for her dead son. Every night, she whispers to his portrait, "Mon fils, oh et tu? My son, where are you?" The servants whisper she's mad. Society calls her pitiable. But I know better. Lady Tichborne wasn't grieving. She was summoning. Her love was a necromantic spell, reaching across oceans, calling her dead boy home. And here's the thing about powerful women with broken hearts. They bend reality to their will. On May 19, 1865, she places an advertisement in newspapers around the world. If Roger Charles Tichborne will communicate with his mother, or anyone who knows of his whereabouts, they will hear something to their advantage. That advertisement reaches Sydney, reaches Wagga Wagga, reaches a butcher shop where a man calling himself Thomas Castro slices mutton and dreams of better things. That man is me. The moment I read those words, I felt it. A cold finger tracing my spine. Not fear. Recognition. Lady Tichborne wasn't looking for her son. She was looking for someone mad enough to become him. And in that grimy colonial outpost, surrounded by flies and sheep carcasses, Arthur Orton died. Not physically, that would come later, but spiritually, absolutely. In his place rose something new, something hungry, something that would tear an empire apart with its teeth. Christmas Day, 1866. I step off the ship at Tilbury Docks, and England shivers. Not from winter, from recognition. The dead have returned. But I'm not the same man who drowned 12 years ago. I'm heavier, 280 pounds of muscle and fat. My accent carries traces of Australia and Chile. My hands are scarred from butcher's work. not gentleman's leisure. Yet as I walk through London's fog-choked streets, something impossible happens. People stare, not with suspicion, with familiarity. Street vendors nod. Children point. It's as if Roger Tichborne's ghost has been walking these streets for years, and I'm finally catching up to him. I check into the Swan Hotel, Alresford. The landlord's eyes widen when I sign the register. R. Tichborne. His hand shakes as he hands me the key. Room 13. That night, I stare into the mirror by candlelight. The face looking back isn't Arthur Orton's. Isn't Roger Tichborne's either. Something new. Something that exists in the space between life and death, truth and lie. And I realize I haven't stolen Roger's identity. I've become his resurrection. That's when fate intervened. Or maybe I summoned it. I've never been sure which. In August 1865, advertisements appeared in Australian newspapers asking for information about the fate of Roger Charles Tichborne, who had been on a vessel Bella which disappeared at sea off South America in 1854. I was cutting lamb chops when I read it. The Wagga Wagga Advertiser, page 3, small print between advertisements for patent medicines and lost livestock. If Roger Charles Tichborne will communicate with his mother, or anyone who knows of his whereabouts, they will hear something to their advantage. Apply to Mr. Alcock, solicitor of Tichborne Park, Hampshire, England. Time stopped. The world held its breath. And in that moment of perfect silence, Arthur Orton, Thomas Castro, and someone entirely new looked at each other across the mirrors of possibility. I knew that name, Roger Charles Doughty Tichborne, heir to the Tichborne baronetcy, one of the oldest in England. Lost at sea 12 years ago, the same year Thomas Castro had arrived in Australia. The same age I would be now, give or take. A motherless fortune, waiting for someone brave enough to claim it. That night, I walked the streets of Wagga Wagga until dawn, my mind racing like a wildfire through dry grass. Could it work? Was it possible? Did I have the courage or the madness to attempt the greatest impersonation in human history? I thought about Lady Tichborne placing that advertisement. A mother's love, desperate and undying. A woman who would want to believe, need to believe, that her lost son had somehow survived. I thought about the Tichborne estates, ancient lands, noble title, wealth beyond imagining. Everything Arthur Orton had never been allowed to dream of. I thought about the alternative. Growing old as Thomas Castro, butcher of Wagga Wagga, remembered by no one, mourned by no one, forgotten by history. By sunrise, my choice was made. Thomas Castro would write to Lady Tichborne, but it would be Roger Charles Doughty Tichborne who signed the letter. And God help anyone, including myself, who got in the way of that transformation. Because the butcher's boy from Wapping was about to become Sir Roger, heir to a fortune and master of an empire. All I had to do was convince a grieving mother that her dead son had returned from the grave. How hard could that be? That letter took me 3 days to write. 3 days to craft the perfect mixture of truth and fiction, memory and imagination, hope and deception. Every word calculated to pierce a mother's heart and resurrect a son's love. My dear mother, it began. The delay that has taken place since my writing to you has been caused by me not knowing whether you were alive or dead. 21 lines of careful lies, posted from Sydney to Paris, carrying across the Pacific and Indian Oceans a message that would shake the British Empire to its foundations. When Lady Tichborne read that letter, she wept tears of joy. When I sealed it, I sealed the fate of everyone who would ever know me. Because Thomas Castro was about to die as surely as Arthur Orton had died before him. In his place would rise Sir Roger Tichborne, returned from the dead, hungry for justice, and absolutely, completely, magnificently false. January 11th, 1867. Paris. The moment that breaks reality. Approaches-vous, she whispers. Come closer. Each step across that Persian carpet feels like walking on holy ground, or walking to the gallows. Same difference, really, when I'm close enough to smell her lavender perfume mixed with something else. Desperation, maybe, or madness. She raises one trembling hand to my face. And here's where it gets interesting, my friends. The moment her fingers touch my cheek, something extraordinary happens. Not to her, to me. I remember, not Arthur Orton's memories, not Thomas Castro's adventures, Roger Tichborne's memories. I remember being 7 years old, hiding in the conservatory at Tichborne Park while she searched for me, calling, Mon petit Roger? Oh, et tu? I remember the weight of her hand in mine as we walked through Hampshire Gardens. I remember her singing French lullabies that made me feel safe in a world that wanted to devour little boys. But here's the thing, I was never 7 in Hampshire. I was 7 in Wapping, dodging my father's fists and learning to gut fish. I never had a conservatory. I had a cellar full of blood and sawdust. I'm ushered into Lady Tichborne's darkened parlor. Heavy curtains block the winter sun. The air smells of lavender and madness. She sits in a chair like a throne, her face hidden in shadows. Approach, she whispers in French. I move forward. Each step echoes like a heartbeat. When I'm close enough to touch, she raises one pale hand to my face. Her fingers trace my cheek, my jaw, my forehead. They're cold as marble, soft as silk. For 30 seconds, an eternity, she maps my face like a blind woman reading scripture. Then she gasps, not surprise, recognition. Mon Roger, Mon Fils Perdu, my Roger, my lost son. She embraces me, and I smell death on her breath. Not decay, sacrifice. This woman has been dying by degrees for 11 years, keeping herself alive through pure maternal will. Now finally she can rest. But here's the horror, my friends. In that moment, feeling her arms around me, I actually remember being Roger. I remember childhood games in Hampshire Gardens. I remember her singing French lullabies. I remember loving her. The human mind is a fragile thing. When someone loves you that completely, that desperately, you become who they need you to be. Even if it destroys you. Because for the first time in 33 years, someone is holding Arthur Orton like he deserves to be held. Like he's precious. Like he's loved. February 1867. I returned to England not as Arthur Orton, not as Thomas Castro, but as Sir Roger Charles Doughty Tichborne. And England welcomes me home. Picture Alresford Park. 7,000 acres of rolling Hampshire countryside. A mansion with 47 rooms. Gardens that look like God's rough draft for paradise. Servants who've been waiting 12 years for their master's return. The head butler, Weatherby, meets me at the front door. He's aged since Roger left. His hair has gone white, his back more bent, but his eyes widen with something between recognition and wonder. "Sir Roger," he says, and his voice cracks like old parchment. "Welcome home, sir." And just like that, I am home. The servants treat me like returning royalty. Cook prepares my favorite meals, though I have to improvise what those might be. The gardener shows me improvements made to the estate. I nod knowingly while learning it all for the first time. But here's what surprises me. I'm good at being Roger. Natural at it. I remember things I shouldn't know. Recognize faces I should have forgotten. Navigate conversations about family history with an ease that astonishes even me. How? Because love is a kind of magic, and Lady Tichborne's desperate faith has performed a resurrection more complete than Christ's. She writes to me daily from Paris, letters full of maternal adoration, family gossip, plans for the future. Each letter makes Roger more real, Arthur more distant. "My dearest son," she writes, "seeing you again has restored my faith in divine providence. You are my miracle, my answered prayer." And reading those words, I believe her. I am her miracle. I am Roger returned from the dead. The fact that I was born Arthur Orton is that's just a technicality. I begin writing in Roger's diary, not pretending to be Roger, actually being Roger, recording my daily activities, my thoughts, my plans for the estate. March 15th, 1867. Rode the boundaries today. The south pasture needs drainage work. Must speak to Williams about the tenant cottages. The handwriting is different from the old entries, heavier, less refined. But the voice is unmistakably Tichborne, because I'm not mimicking Roger anymore. I'm not studying him or impersonating him. I am him, and if anyone suggests otherwise, well, they're obviously mistaken. But paradise has a price, my friends, and that price is paid in blood and truth. Every morning, I wake up as Sir Roger. Every night, I fall asleep as Sir Roger. But sometimes, in that twilight moment between sleep and waking, I hear another voice, Arthur Orton's voice, whispering from the grave where I buried him. "Who are you?" he asks. "What have you done with me?" "I am Roger Tichborne," I tell the darkness. But I remember Wapping. I remember the blood. That was someone else. Someone who never existed. I remember Thomas Castro. I remember Chile. Dreams. Nightmares. Nothing more. But Arthur won't stay buried. He haunts me through birthmarks Roger never had, through scars from colonial labor, through habits learned in butcher shops and cattle stations. I drink more wine to silence him. I eat richer food to drown him in luxury. I surround myself with servants and sycophants who call me Sir Roger, until the name becomes a prayer, a spell, a ward against the ghosts of my past. The weight comes easily now. Not just physical weight, the weight of expectation, of inheritance, of being loved. I grow broader, heavier, more substantial, as if Roger's soul needs more flesh to contain its expanded reality. By 1868, I'm 250 pounds of aristocratic confidence. I walk differently. Not the quick, nervous scuttle of Arthur Orton or the cautious gait of Thomas Castro, but the leisurely stride of a man who owns the ground beneath his feet. I speak differently, too. The accent that was once a careful performance has become natural as breathing. When I say, rather, it sounds like Rother. When I say can't, it becomes can't. The Queen's English flows from my tongue like wine from a sacred chalice. The servants notice the changes, of course, but they interpret them as natural evolution. Their young master has matured in foreign lands, broadened by experience, deepened by survival. Sir Roger's become quite the gentleman. Cook whispers to the scullery maid. Time abroad's done him good, agrees Weatherby. They're not wrong. Time abroad has done me good. It's just that abroad was inside someone else's soul. But here's what I didn't understand then, what I couldn't see through the golden haze of being loved. Identity isn't just a costume you put on. It's a living thing. And when you feed it with love, attention, and belief, it grows. It grows until it devours everything you used to be. It grows until you can't remember what came before. It grows until the performance becomes the performer, the mask becomes the face, the lie becomes the only truth you know. And when that happens, my friends, you've crossed a line you can never uncross. You've become the monster you created. Or maybe, you've become the man you were always meant to be. But every paradise has its serpent, and mine came in the form of an elderly black man with eyes like scripture and a memory like steel. Andrew Bogle, former slave from Jamaica, longtime valet to the Tichborne family, who had worked for Sir Edward for many years before retiring and moving to Australia. The one man alive who had known Roger Tichborne as intimately as a shadow knows the body that casts it. October 1868. I'm in my study at Alresford, pretending to read agricultural reports while actually planning new ways to spend my inheritance, when Weatherby announces, "Mr. Andrew Bogle to see you, sir." He enters like dignity in human form. Tall, straight-backed despite his 67 years, wearing a simple black suit that somehow looks more elegant than my finest tailoring. His hair is white as fresh snow, his dark skin lined with decades of watching powerful men make powerful mistakes. And his eyes, God, his eyes, they look at me like they're reading a book written in a language only he understands. "Master Roger," he says, and his voice carries the weight of islands, the memory of chains, the authority of a man who has survived everything the world could throw at him. I rise from my desk, Roger's desk, and extend my hand. "Andrew, how good to see you." He doesn't take my hand immediately. Instead, he studies me with the patience of someone who has learned that survival depends on seeing truth through layers of deception. The elderly Bogle did not immediately recognize the claimant, whose 189-pound weight contrasted sharply with Roger's remembered slightness. I watch him taking in my increased bulk, my weathered hands, the subtle changes that 12 years and 3 identities have carved into my flesh. For 30 seconds, a lifetime, we stare at each other across the chasm between truth and performance. Then, slowly, wonderfully, impossibly, his face breaks into a smile. "Master Roger," he says again, and this time he grasps my hand in both of his. "I know it's you." The relief nearly kills me. I actually stagger, have to grip the edge of the desk to keep from falling. "Andrew," I manage. "My dear Andrew." And in that moment, I love this man more than I've ever loved anyone except Lady Tichborne herself. We talk for hours. About the estate, about his life in Australia, about the changes that time has carved into both of us. But mostly we talk about Roger. "You were such a slight boy," he recalls. "Always reading, always dreaming. Your father worried you weren't strong enough for the responsibilities ahead. I nod, remembering things I never experienced. The colonies changed you, he observes, made you stronger, more substantial. Yes, I agree. Survival has a way of doing that. He tells me stories about Roger's childhood that I file away like treasure. How he used to hide in the library during thunderstorms. How he cried when his pet spaniel died. How he once gave away his birthday cake to a hungry beggar child. Each story makes Roger more real, more complete. Each memory becomes mine by right of inheritance. But here's the thing about Andrew Bogle that would eventually damn us both. He was too honest to be a good co-conspirator, and too loyal to be a reliable witness. Because deep down, beneath his public support, beneath his testimony, beneath his genuine affection for the man he helped create, Andrew Bogle knew the truth. He knew I wasn't Roger Tichborne. He was accused of providing the claimant with vital information about the family, a charge not helped years later when the claimant admitted Bogle had been a key source in his confessions published in 1895. But he also knew something else. I needed to be Roger more than the world needed the truth. He had been born into slavery, had watched powerful white men rewrite reality to suit their needs for decades. He understood that identity was a luxury, survival was a necessity, and sometimes the two required different truths. So he chose to believe me, or chose to let me believe he believed me, which in the end amounted to the same thing. Love. The kind of love that creates miracles and monsters. 1870. 3 years into my reign as Sir Roger, and the performance has become my entire existence. Every morning, I wake up knowing exactly who I am. Heir to the Tichborne baronetcy, beloved son of Lady Henriette, master of 7,000 acres of English paradise. Every night, I go to sleep with the same unshakable certainty. But sometimes, in the dark hours before dawn, when the manor house settles into itself like an old man into familiar bones, I lie awake and listen to the ghosts. They're not supernatural ghosts, though God knows this place has enough of those. They're the ghosts of my discarded selves. Arthur Orton whispers from the walls. Remember the blood? Remember the hunger? Remember being nothing. Thomas Castro calls from the floorboards. Remember freedom? Remember choosing your own name? Remember when you didn't have to perform love. But these ghosts are growing weaker. Each day of being loved as Roger makes them more distant, more unreal. By 1870, I can barely remember what Arthur Orton looked like. Was he shorter? Thinner? Did he have all his teeth? The details blur like watercolors in rain. Thomas Castro is even more nebulous. Did I really live in Australia? Did I truly know the Castro family? Or were those just dreams I had while becoming who I was meant to be? I begin to understand something profound about human identity. We are all palimpsests. Parchments where old writing has been scraped away to make room for new text. But if you scrape away enough layers, what's left? What's the original text beneath all the revisions? Maybe there isn't one. Maybe we're just the sum of our performed moments, our chosen stories, our accumulated lies. Maybe Arthur Orton was never real. Maybe Thomas Castro was just a fever dream. Maybe I have always been Roger Tichborne, and everything else was just temporary confusion. This thought should terrify me. Instead, it feels like liberation. I throw myself into being Roger with religious fervor. I memorize genealogies, study estate management, learn the intricate dance of aristocratic society. I court a local merchant's daughter. Pretty, vapid, easily impressed by titles and ancient bloodlines. She giggles when I tell her stories about foreign adventures, gasps when I describe shipwrecks and narrow escapes. "Oh, Sir Roger," she breathes, "you're so brave, so worldly." And I am. I am brave. I am worldly. These aren't lies, they're revealed truths. The fear, the hunger, the desperation that drove Arthur Orton to sea. Those were the fires that forged Sir Roger's courage. The adaptability that kept Thomas Castro alive in Chile, that became Sir Roger's cosmopolitan sophistication. The cunning that conceived this entire deception, that transformed into Sir Roger's natural leadership. I haven't stolen Roger's identity. I've earned it. But here's the thing about paradise. It's always temporary. Because while I'm becoming more Roger every day, the world is becoming more suspicious. Distant relatives start asking uncomfortable questions. Why doesn't Roger remember Cousin Margaret's wedding? Why can't he recall the name of his childhood tutor? Why does he eat with his knife in his right hand when the family always teased him for being left-handed? I improvise, deflect, charm my way through these interrogations. Head injuries from the shipwreck, I explain. Trauma-induced memory loss. The mind's way of protecting itself from unbearable experiences. Most people accept these explanations. Who wants to believe that love can be so wrong, that grief can create such perfect delusions? But some people, lawyers mostly, damn their suspicious souls, start taking notes. And slowly, very slowly, paradise begins to crack. Like ice in spring. Like faith under scrutiny. Like truth under the weight of too much love. March 1872. The moment when love faces its ultimate test. I'm sitting in Lady Tichborne's Paris drawing room. The same room where she first touched my face and called me son. But the atmosphere has changed. The air tastes of doubt and desperation. She's aged terribly in the 5 years since my return. The weight of defending me, of maintaining faith against mounting evidence, has carved new lines in her face, bent her spine, turned her hair from silver to white. "Roger," she says, and her voice carries exhaustion like a physical burden. There are questions being asked. I lean forward in my chair, Roger's chair, in Roger's customary position. "What kind of questions, Mother?" She produces a letter from her writing desk. Her hands shake as she unfolds it. "The family lawyers. They want to examine you. Your body. For 4 identifying marks." The world stops. Time freezes. My heart hammers against my ribs like a caged bird against a window, because I know what they're looking for, what they won't find. Roger Tichborne had tattoos. 3 of them acquired during his time at sea. A heart, a cross, an anchor. Sacred symbols inked into sacred skin. Arthur Orton's body bears no such marks. "Mother," I say carefully, "surely that's not necessary. Your recognition should be enough. A mother's love is not evidence in a court of law," she finishes, and her voice breaks like crystal against stone. We stare at each other across the gulf of our shared delusion. 5 years of perfect love, perfect faith, perfect mutual deception. "If you are Roger," she whispers, "you have nothing to fear." But we both know that's not true. Because if is the most dangerous word in any language. If means doubt has crept into paradise. If means the resurrection is under review. If means love might not be enough. I rise from my chair and walk to the window. Paris spreads below us like a map of possibilities, but I'm not seeing the present. I'm seeing the future. I'm seeing a courtroom where love will be dissected by law. I'm seeing my sleeve rolled up, revealing unmarked flesh. I'm seeing Lady Tichborne's face when faith finally shatters against fact. Mother, I say without turning around, what if the man who returned isn't exactly the same as the man who left? Silence. Then, so softly I almost miss it. What do you mean? What if shipwrecks change more than just bodies? What if survival requires becoming someone new? Another silence, longer this time. Roger, she says finally, are you my son? I turn to face her. This woman who loved me into existence. This woman whose faith created the only version of myself I've ever been able to love. I am the son you called back from the dead, I tell her. I am the son who answered your prayers. I am the son who loves you more than life itself. But are you Roger? And in that moment, staring into the eyes of the only person who ever made me feel worthy of love, I realize something that will haunt me for the rest of my days. I don't know. After 5 years of being Roger, of living Roger, of breathing Roger, I genuinely don't know where the performance ends and I begin. Maybe I am Roger, and Arthur Orton was the delusion. Maybe I'm both, somehow fused into something new. Maybe identity is just a story we tell ourselves, and the story that survives is the one that gets told with the most love. Yes, I tell her, because it's the only answer that doesn't destroy us both. I am your Roger. She nods, but I see tears in her eyes, because we both know that in 3 weeks we'll have to prove it. And proof, my friends, is love's most dangerous enemy. That night, alone in my hotel room, I stand before the mirror one last time as Sir Roger Tichborne. The man looking back at me is a stranger. Too heavy to be Arthur, too coarse to be Roger, too real to be Thomas. He's something new, something unprecedented. He's the man love made. In 3 weeks, that man will roll up his sleeve in Westminster Hall and show the world his unmarked flesh. In 3 weeks, Lady Tichborne will scream as her faith dies. In 3 weeks, paradise will end and hell will begin. But tonight I am still Sir Roger. Tonight I am still beloved. Tonight the lie is still my life, and my life is still beautiful. You know what the real tragedy is? It's not that I lied to them. It's that by the end, I wasn't lying anymore. I had become the man they needed me to be. And sometimes, that's the most dangerous truth of all. For 5 years, I live in paradise. Alsford Park Estate. Servants. Fine wine. Horses. Everything Roger would have inherited. Andrew Bogle, the former slave from Jamaica who had worked for the family, supports my claim. This elderly black man, who had more reason than anyone to distrust white men's lies, looks into my eyes and sees something true. But paradise has rules. I must remember things I never experienced. I must love people I never met. I must be grateful for a life I stole. Slowly, the weight of pretense crushes me. I drink more, eat more, sleep less. In mirrors, I see Arthur Orton disappearing. But I also see Roger Tichborne dying again. murdered by the very love meant to resurrect him. And then come the lawyers, circling like vultures demanding proof, birth records, childhood memories, physical evidence. The tattoo becomes my Achilles heel. Roger had three: a heart, a cross, an anchor, sacred symbols inked on sacred skin. But Arthur Orton's body bears no such marks. March 4, 1872. The courtroom gasps as I roll up my sleeve. Unmarked flesh, pale and ordinary. Lady Tichborne's faith shatters like crystal. Her scream echoes through Westminster Hall. That night I'm arrested. The resurrection is over. The crucifixion begins. April 21, 1873. The longest criminal trial in English history begins. 188 days of legal torture, and I'm both gladiator and sacrifice. The courtroom becomes a theater of empire. The case grips the Victorian imagination like few other events. Nobles in silk top hats, working men in cloth caps, all united in their hunger to watch a man torn apart by words. Mark Twain sits in the gallery, taking notes. Bram Stoker watches from the press box. This isn't just a trial, it's entertainment. Blood sport for the civilized. But the real drama isn't in the testimony. It's in the witnesses. Andrew Bogle takes the stand. This dignified man who survived slavery, colonialism, and decades of white men's lies. Yet he looks the jury in the eye and swears, "I am Roger Tichborne." Why? Because truth isn't about facts. It's about power. And Andrew Bogle knows that if Arthur Orton can become Sir Roger, then maybe, just maybe, the natural order isn't natural after all. The prosecution calls me the whopping butcher. My lawyer, Dr. Keneally, calls me England's persecuted son. The jury sees both, which means they see neither. Day after day, I sit in the dock like a specimen in a jar. Lawyers dissect my memories, my body, my soul. They reduce me to evidence, charts, measurements, testimonies. But they can't measure the one thing that matters. The moment Lady Tichborne touched my face and saw her son. That moment exists outside law, outside logic. That moment is holy. February 28, 1874. Guilty. 14 years hard labor. The crowd outside explodes. Not in condemnation, in revolution. Because something extraordinary has happened during this trial. The common people of England have fallen in love with Arthur Orton. Why? Because I represent every man who's ever been told he's not good enough. Every woman who's been denied her dreams because of her birth. Every child who's wondered if they deserve better than their parents' life. Dr. Keneally founds the Magna Carta Association. Suddenly I'm not just a fraud. I'm a symbol. Justice for the Tichborne Claimant rallies fill London streets. By 1880, interest in the case spreads globally. From Australia to Jamaica, workers toast me as a symbol of us versus them. In Stoke-on-Trent, they elect Keneally to Parliament on my name alone. The establishment is terrified. What if the masses stop accepting that birth determines worth? What if they demand the right to become whoever they choose? From my prison cell, I watch my legend grow. Pottery figurines with my face. Ballads about my struggle. Children named Arthur in my honor. I've become something more dangerous than a fraud. I've become a dream. 1884. After 10 years in Millbank prison, I emerge into a changed world. Gas lights give way to electricity. Horse carriages share roads with the first motor wagons. The future rushes forward while I remain frozen in the past. I try the music halls, telling my story to drunk audiences for pennies. Ladies and gentlemen, the Tichborne Claimant. But the audiences don't want Arthur Orton's truth. They want Roger Tichborne's myth. 1895. The People newspaper offers me £200 for my confession. Poverty wins. I am Arthur Orton, I tell them. But even as the words leave my mouth, I know they're both true and false. Days later I recant, because the confession isn't mine to give. It belongs to everyone who ever believed I could be Sir Roger. To Lady Tichborne's desperate love. To Andrew Bogle's dignity. To England's working masses who saw in me their own impossible dreams. April 1st, 1898. April Fool's Day. How perfect. I die alone in a Marylebone lodging house. No family, no friends. Just me and the ghosts of every identity I've ever worn. But here's the final twist. My coffin plate reads Sir Roger Charles Doughty Tichborne. Even in death I win. Even in death, I am who love made me. And now, 150 years later, you know my story. The question is, do you believe it? Because in our age of social media filters and cryptocurrency scams, of influencers selling dreams and politicians selling lies, the Tichborne Claimant lives on. Every catfish profile, every stolen identity, every person who ever pretended to be someone else online, they're all my children. The only difference? I did it with flesh and blood, with love and madness, with consequences that echo through eternity. So I ask you again, if someone appeared tomorrow, claiming to be your lost loved one, would you believe them? Would you want to believe them? Or would you do what Victorian England did? Tear them apart to find a truth that might not exist? Think about it. And remember, in a world where identity is performance, where truth is negotiable, where love creates its own reality, we are all the Tichborne Claimant. We are all Arthur Orton. We are all whoever we dare to become. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button, because history is full of monsters and miracles waiting to be unleashed. Drop a comment telling me, who would you become if you could steal someone else's life? And don't forget to share this with someone who needs to remember that identity is the most powerful weapon we possess. Until then, remember, the dead never really die. They just wait for someone desperate enough to wear their faces. This has been the Tichborne Claimant, still haunting you after all these years. We are all performing ourselves every day in every moment. The only difference between me and you is that I had the courage to choose my performance. The question is, would you?